All right, this morning I want us to reflect on some of the stories in the life of Solomon and get some of the wisdom that we get from King Solomon. And we see there in 1 Kings 3 some of the stories that we'll touch on this morning. So wisdom from King Solomon. If you think in the Bible, there are different characters in the Bible that give us different examples, help encourage us in different ways. You think of Job in the Bible. Job is there to encourage and to teach us about hardship and suffering. So there are people in the Bible like Job that are there to encourage us. And oftentimes people ask the question, why does God allow suffering? And I always think, well, that's the reason why the story of Job is there. The story of Job is there to answer that very question of why God allows suffering and trials in people's lives, and the many aspects of Job's life where, it sort of revealed his heart. And so that's one example. Another example is David. David is an example of helping us to submit to ungodly authority. We all are happy to submit to godly authority most of the time. But what about ungodly authority? When you have unsaved people that may have authority over you, how do you then behave yourself? Well, David was in that situation. He was a man after God's own heart, one that was appointed the king. But even then, he tried to show Saul the respect that he deserved, even though Saul was acting very wickedly. What about Daniel's example? Daniel's example is very inspiring. Daniel's example helps us to stand up for what is right, even in the face of adversity, even when you stand alone. Daniel stood alone against the kingdom in Babylon. And it's a great example. Samson's example. So you've got good examples and you've got bad examples. Samson was an example of hanging around the wrong crowd, having ungodly influences, ungodly company, and the kind of trouble that it gets you into. And he ended up committing suicide, having both his eyes out, grinding at the mill like an animal. It leads to that. Now, what about Solomon? Solomon's example, I think, is very pertinent to us who live in countries like Australia, where we are very prosperous. And, our struggles and decisions in life is, what career path we're going to take, where we're going to live, what job we're going to take. Our struggles are not the struggles of third world countries. But as we reflect on King Solomon's example teaches us the vanity of a life lived without God at the center. The vanity of a life lived without God as its purpose. And we see that in King Solomon's life. So who was King Solomon? King Solomon, he was the third king of Israel and the second son of King David and Bathsheba. Because if you remember, when David committed adultery with Bathsheba, there was a child born of that adulterous relationship, and the child was taken from them. And the husband of Bathsheba was killed by King David by putting him in the heat of the battle and then drawing out the troops. So even though he had commanded his captain, Joab, to give the command to put Bathsheba's husband, his name will lose me right now, right in the heat of the battle, and then he pulled back the army, and this is why he died. And yet David was accused of that murder because David was the one that gave the command. So he's the second son. So after that, even though David had committed a grave sin, killed Uriah the Hittite, was Bathsheba's husband, committed adultery. The child was taken from them, but after that he ended up marrying Bathsheba, and then they had Solomon. So Solomon was the wisest and richest man that ever lived. That's what we saw in 1 Kings 3, that God would promise him. He built and dedicated the temple that David had envisioned for the Lord. So David wanted to build God a house, and Solomon ended up building it. Now, a lot of people think that the reason why Solomon built that house instead of David is because David was a man of war and God didn't want David to build the house because he was a man of war. And I don't believe that's the case. So if you go back and read the story, I believe that's what David thought the reason was. So David told Solomon, this is the reason why God wouldn't want me to build a house. But that's not what God actually told David. I believe when God spoke to David, he actually told David, you're not going to build me a house. In fact, I'm going to build you a house, and my son's going to build you a house. And that was a prophecy about Jesus Christ. But then I think David understood that as his son Solomon was going to build the house. But I think God still used what David wanted to do for God and using Solomon as a picture of Jesus Christ. Even though it was not God's initial intention, he allowed David to go ahead with David's plans, and I think David just misunderstood what God was telling him at the time. So you can go back and read that story yourself and see if that checks out, but that's how I understand it. Now, Solomon wrote most of the Proverbs. Most of the Proverbs, I say, because he didn't write all of the Proverbs. Some of the Proverbs were written by others. He wrote the Song of Solomon and Ecclesiastes, where you learn about Solomon's wisdom and his insights in life and his experiences. So if you have not read these books, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, you should read them. And they're a bit like the Psalms, where people read them again and again, and they glean a lot of wisdom and doctrine from them. And if what God is saying is true, and it certainly is, that Solomon was the richest and the wisest man that ever lived, and then the wisest man then writes some Proverbs, it's probably a good idea to go and read them and try and apply them, because if you want to have the wisdom of the wisest man that ever lived, well, God has provided them for us in Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes. So we should read them and definitely take them to heart. So if you think about, where King Solomon comes to the picture, you have 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. 1 Samuel is effectively about King Saul. King Saul. 2 Samuel is about King David. And then about the first half of First Kings, so you have 1 and 2 Kings. 1 Kings is 22 chapters, and then the first 11 chapters of 1 Kings is about the life of Solomon, and 1 Kings 11 ends at the death of Solomon. So you can go and read a bit more about King Solomon's life, because we're just going to touch on it a bit this morning. And then, of course, you have the parallel account in 2 Chronicles. Now let's go to 1 Kings 3, where we started the Bible reading this morning. And let's talk about Solomon's dream. Solomon's dream. I think this story is very profound, because I think it gives a lot of insight into what is truly important in this life. What are the things that are truly important? In 1 Kings 3, verse 5, we read, in Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give thee. So this is a very famous story, and maybe you're familiar with it. But what happens here is God appears to Solomon in a dream and basically gives him an open check and says, you can ask me for whatever you want, and he will give it to you, and God will give it to him. So Solomon could have asked for anything. He could have asked for something ungodly. And yet here we see, even before Solomon was given this supernatural wisdom from God and the ability to get wealth, and that he was already quite a wise man, in that when he was presented with this opportunity, how many of us would have made the same choice as Solomon? I often tell this joke that was told to me, because when it comes to stories in the Bible, people tell variations of these stories, right? And one story that was told to me was, a man comes across like a lamp, like Aladdin and the genie, and rubs the lamp. Genies normally give 3 wishes. But this genie was doing poof, genie appears in front of him, gives him 2 options. He says to the man, I will give you either all the wisdom in the world or all the riches in the world. And then, the man thinks really hard, and he says, you know what? I'll go with the wisdom. because that's the wiser choice. And then he asks for the wisdom, and the genie says, your wish is granted. Poof, it's gone, puff of smoke. And then the man, now that he's got all the wisdom in the world, he's like, oh, this wisdom comes over him. And he's like, in deep thought, he's like, And he says, I should have taken the money. So that is a joke from the world to illustrate that's what the world values. That even though they will take this story of Solomon, where this whole idea of genie or God coming and giving him whatever wish he wants, that even when the wisdom is taken, they still prefer the money, because the world values the money. The world values riches. And what we can learn from King Solomon's example is this is a vain endeavor. So Solomon, though, when he's presented with this opportunity, what's here? Solomon said, Thou hast showed unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. And I think it's interesting that when Solomon meets God in his dream, and God says, you ask whatever you want, the first thing Solomon does is he praises God for his goodness. He doesn't just answer God, he doesn't just think about himself, oh, well, what can I get? No, he praises God that, saying, you've shown kindness to my father, and that my father was able to rule over Israel, and now he has a son to rule over his throne in his stead. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. So this shows not only the humility of King Solomon, but shows that he was also very self-aware. I mean, he was very aware of his limitations, that even when confronted with God, you would think, he's grown up in royalty. He's the king of Israel. I mean, he has the power of a king in Israel, and yet he is aware enough of himself and his limitations to say to God, I know I am but a little child. That he, compared to God and compared to the wisdom of the world, he does not know everything. I know not how to go out or to come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? So like in the joke that I told you about the genie, I mean, he's saying here, God has given him this opportunity. What would you like? And what does Solomon ask for? Solomon asks for wisdom. This is why he was the wisest man that ever lived, because when God wanted to give him something, this is what he asked for. And God was extremely pleased with what he asked for. And the speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said unto him, because thou hast asked this thing. What did he ask for? Understanding. He asked for wisdom. That's what he wanted first and foremost, because he knew that was the most important thing. And as you grow older in your life, I hope you realize that that is the more important thing. And has not asked for thyself long life, neither has asked riches for thyself, nor has asked the life of thine enemies, but has asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and an understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. So God honored Solomon, but in asking for wisdom, he also granted him these other things. And likewise in life, these things can follow, because if you have wisdom in life, in how you live your life and the decisions you make, I think you will be taken care of, because you will know decisions to make. You'll know how to make money. You'll know how to not squander money and save money. So I think these will naturally follow. But here, God is giving Solomon supernatural wisdom. And I think a supernatural, like sort of abundance of riches, even above what his own wisdom may have gotten him. If thou will walk in my ways, and to keep my statutes and my commandments as thy father David did walk, then will I lengthen thy days. So not only is he saying, hey, if you're obedient, he's going to give Solomon long life as well. Solomon awoke. Behold, it was a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord and offered up burnt offerings and offered peace offerings and made a feast to all his servants. So in Solomon's dream, he asked for wisdom. And God was pleased with him that he didn't just ask for, long life, riches, and his enemies, the life of his enemies, because that can become the life of a lot of people. Think about what lengths people will go to they will destroy relationships. They will do all sorts of things, evil things to people for money or to get even and things like that. So these are things that people value, but yet Solomon was wise enough to ask for wisdom. And the truth is, a fool with money likely won't have it for long. I mean, how many times do you see people, they win the lottery or they win vast amounts of money, but if they're a fool, they just end up squandering it and they're just back to square one. So, having a lot of material possessions and being foolish, not only do you risk just squandering it all, like those sort of fools, but they can be very dangerous as well. Somebody who's a fool that then gets a lot of wealth, it may be too much for them to handle, either it's money or it's power, right? So you need wisdom. Wisdom is what we need because it allows us to enable to rightly judge how to live our life correctly. So this story of King Solomon, I think, is such an amazing story because you see the humility of King Solomon and him knowing his limitations and then asking for the right thing. And it's a good reminder that for us, that wealth and revenge isn't the be-all and end-all, even though for some people in their lives it can be. Now, the next half of the chapter, the next part of the chapter, we then see King Solomon demonstrate that wisdom in this story, if you're not familiar with it. Then came there two women that were harlots unto the king. So what are harlots? Harlots are prostitutes, and stood before him. And the one woman said, "O my lord, I and this woman dwell in one house." So you have two prostitutes who are living together, and back then, the contraceptives technology is not like it is today. "I was delivered of a child with her in the house, and it came to pass the third day after that I was delivered, that this woman was delivered also, and we were together. There was no stranger with us in the house, save we two in the house." So there's two prostitutes, both pregnant. 3 days, they give birth apart. And this woman's child died in the night because she overlaid it, and she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me while thy handmaid slept, and laid it in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And some people, they warn about co-sleeping with children, and the risk there is definitely real. I mean, we see it in the Bible where these ladies are co-sleeping with their very young children, and one rolled over it and actually killed her children. Killed her child. So I don't know if it's the weight, of just being too heavy for the child, or maybe she was overweight, and then that's another thing as well. So, but it happens. But that doesn't mean it's wrong to co-sleep with children, but there are definitely risks there. "Laid her dead child in my bosom, and when I rose in the morning to give my child suck, behold, it was dead. But when I had considered it in the morning, behold, it was not my son which I did bear." So what happened? One lady rolls over her child dies, switches it out with the other prostitute's baby. The other woman said, "Nay, but the living is my son, and the dead thy son." And this said, "No, but the dead is thy son, and the living is my son." Thus they spake before the king. Whenever I think of this story, whenever my kids have a dispute, and they're saying, this person said this, and this person said this, I always think of this story because I always think, I wish I had the wisdom of Solomon to think of some out-of-the-box solution to reveal who truly is telling the truth or not, and to just know, because of this test that I did, I know who's telling the truth and who isn't, and then to be able to judge righteously like Solomon did here. So what did Solomon do? Solomon says in verse 24, "And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, divide the living child in two and give half to the one and the half to the other. Then spake the woman whose the living child was unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son. And she said, O my lord, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. But the other said, let it be neither mine nor thine, but divide it. See, so people today, they have the benefit of having this story. So if somebody tried to do something like that, we'll just destroy the thing that you're fighting over, and one person says, oh no, but just, or maybe somebody who knows this story is going to say the same thing and say, oh, let's give it to the other person, and now you still don't know. But in this scenario, we see the wisdom of Solomon here, where he used an out-of-the-box strategy to reveal the hearts of these two women. He said, let's just cut the baby in half, and then you can have half each. And obviously the woman who was the real mother didn't want to kill the child. She says, no, it's better to just, give it to the other woman. Because if you're going to kill the child, let the child live and she can have the child. And the prostitute, who didn't care about the child, just said, okay, we'll just let it perish. Let it be neither mine nor thine, but divide it. And the king answered and said, give her the living child, so it's the one that didn't want to slay it, and in no wise slay it, she is the mother thereof. And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. So there's a couple of things in this story. One is how evil is that prostitute that just wanted to cut the child in half. Solomon was obviously bluffing in order to reveal the hearts of the two ladies. Another interesting thing is, even though these two women were prostitutes, Solomon did not take the child from either of the women. When they came to him with the child, he didn't say, you know what, neither of you women are fit to have this child, and took it from them, because it just goes to show that, even if the woman is not perfect and has major flaws, even in a profession, being a prostitute, it's still better for the child to be with that lady. So there was no sense of taking away the child from these women. But the story shows us a judge requires wisdom in order to discern between two people. And that's the lesson we should take from this story. The lesson we take from this story and from the story of Solomon is how important it is to have wisdom. And that is the principal thing. We seek a lot of things in this world, and we strive for a lot of things in this world, but a lot of people don't strive for wisdom, to learn and gain knowledge and get counsel and understand these things. And that is something that God is trying to teach us in the story of Solomon. Wisdom is the principal thing. Proverbs 4 says here, get wisdom, get understanding, forget it not, neither decline from the words of my mouth. Forsake her not, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee. It's talking about wisdom here. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. See, and this is not in contradiction with having God at the top, because why? The Word is God. God's Word is wisdom. Gaining wisdom and getting wisdom is the same as putting God at the top, because if you want to know God, it's the same as knowing wisdom. And with all thy getting, get understanding. Exalt her, she shall promote thee. She shall bring thee to honor when thou dost embrace her. She shall give to thine head an ornament of grace, a crown of glory shall she deliver to thee. Hear, O my son, and receive my sayings, and the years of thy life shall be many. So this is like Solomon sharing the wisdom that God has sort of granted to him. I have taught thee in the way of wisdom. I have led thee in right paths. When thou goest, thy steps shall not be straitened, and when thou runnest, thou shalt not stumble. Take fast hold of instruction. Let her not go. Keep her, for she is thy life. That's how important wisdom is to get, that God is encouraging us. Wisdom is the principal thing. That's the first lesson. Second lesson we learn is from Solomon's life. Solomon's life. So there's this story where Solomon got his wisdom. There's some other stories about Solomon as well that you can read in 1 Kings 11. But when you read Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes is where you learn about Solomon's experiences and what he actually did. And it was not a godly thing. But why did God allow Solomon to do this? And why did he go through it? To teach us something. So we should take these lessons from King Solomon. One is wisdom is super important. What's the second one? What we learn from Solomon's life. Ecclesiastes 2. Look at what Solomon did in his life. He said, I said in mine heart, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? I sought in mine heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting my heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly till I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under the heaven all the days of their life. So it's an ungodly experiment for Solomon to do, but this is what he did. He basically had unbridled hedonism. He just said, take off the limits, and he's going to basically do what a fool does, but then try and learn from it. So he's giving himself under all sorts of pleasures, all wine, food, drink. It says here, I made me great works. So businesses, properties, I builded me houses, I planted me vineyards, I made me gardens and orchards. So think about people that enjoy nature. And this is what Solomon's doing. He's enjoying nature, gardens, orchards. I planted trees in them of all kinds of fruits. I made me pools of water to water wherewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. So he's building great irrigation systems in order to, have these gardens and farms and vineyards and orchards. I got me servants and maidens and had servants born in my house. So think about building large organizations of people. This is what Solomon has done with all the people that work for him. Also, I had great possessions of great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. So property, assets. I gathered me also silver and gold and the peculiar treasure of kings. So not only is he just getting solid wealth like gold and silver, but when he says the peculiar treasures of kings, what I think about there is all the collectibles. You know how many people get into, you got the baseball cards and the basketball cards, but now our generation's coming, that's the Pokemon cards. Now the next generation is coming out, that's like the NFTs. It's not even something physical anymore. It's just like, some electronic collectible. But people, they spend all this money, all this time, knowing all these. This is what Solomon did too, all the peculiar treasures of kings and of the provinces. I got me men singers and women singers. And what is this alluding to? All the entertainment that can come in life. People start living for entertainment, this experience, this holiday, that holiday, one experience, this one experience, that. Solomon, he did it all. You say, well, Solomon didn't get this. There's nothing new under the sun. Right? He tried it all. Right? He tried to experience everything in life. Delights of the sons of men, his musical instruments and that of all sorts. So I was great and increased more than all that were before me in all Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. So even though he did all this, the normal person would become a fool. But Solomon went through it still maintaining the wisdom that God had given him in 1 Kings 3. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Here's his conclusion. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. 1 Kings 11, you see how crazy Solomon got. Look, but King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, you shall not go in unto them. Neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods, lowercase g. Solomon clave unto these in love. So not only you got the physical pleasures of things and food and entertainment, but also the fornication, right? The women in Solomon's life. And he had, 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wife turned away his heart. And I always thought these numbers were crazy, but now you got people today that are even more ungodly than that. There was this one that was going around on the internet where a lady like slept with 100 men in one day. But people go to this level of depravity when they are just hedonistically living out their life for all these pleasures, and it's not a good end. For it came to pass when Solomon was old, and his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. Now in Deuteronomy, God had actually warned against kings multiplying wives unto themselves. I'll show you here in Deuteronomy 17. It says here, when thou art come unto the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shalt possess it, and shalt dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. Thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. So what is the multiplying of horses representing? It's gaining power. It's like building up an army. That's what the horses are. For as much as the Lord hath said unto you, ye shall not henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. And it shall be when he sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book, out of that which is before the priests the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes, to do them. That his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, that he turn not aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in the kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. I've always found it a bit ironic with King Solomon's life that, you would think that somebody who is wise would not do this, and yet Solomon did do this. So I'm not sure what the answer to that is. Is he the wisest man that ever lived? If the wisest man ever lived did these things, because if he did these things, would he be the wisest man that ever lived? But what do we learn from this experience that Solomon goes through? What's the lesson that we should reflect on? Is the warning of the vanity of seeking purpose in these things. Many men in the world would fantasize about the things that Solomon experienced. All the money, all the power, all the women in the world. And people think they're going to find fulfillment in those things, but they won't. That is the lesson that is being taught here. You think that achieving that vain goal in your life will make you fulfilled, but it won't. It will not satiate that desire for purpose. That's what we have to learn from Solomon. And we say to ourselves, oh yeah, we won't find fulfillment. But I don't know whether we truly believe that, because the way we live our lives, you seek things other than the purpose of God in our lives with such a zeal, passion, and dedication. But if it's not done with the right heart for God, it will ultimately feel empty. But do we really believe that? Because when we go about our lives, we don't really believe that. We think we know better than God and Solomon, because we don't say it openly. We don't say it openly that, this is something that I think will find me fulfillment and find me purpose and find me joy in my life, but we live it through our actions, through the decisions we make in our lives, that we think that thing that we're seeking will make us happy, will give us joy, will find us purpose. And what Solomon is trying to teach us here is it won't. It won't. So it's better to learn this lesson now from Solomon than to spend your whole life seeking that holy grail that you think is going to end you up with joy and a purpose-filled life, but it's not going to. It's not going to. And that's why the only thing that can lead to a life of joy and purpose is a life of godliness and charity, not one of worldliness and self-centeredness. So it all comes down to the purpose in which you do things. Is God at the center of that purpose? If it's not, and then people think, well, if I just achieve that, think about the people that achieve great achievements in sport, great achievements in fame, great achievements in wealth. You say, well, I'm not trying to be the #1 basketball player, or I'm not trying to be like the most famous singer in the world. We may not be striving to be the best thing in the world, but you know what people do say to themselves? They say, if I just get this house. Like how many times people just think like just owning a house, and that's like, I'll feel fulfilled. Or, they invest their life into like a business, and they just think, oh, when I just get that business to this point, then I'll feel fulfilled. You won't. You won't. How do I know that? Well, I don't need to experience. You say, Victor, have you done it yourself and felt that? I mean, do I really need to do it myself to know that God's word is true? We have Solomon. That's how I know. We have Solomon to teach us that lesson, to say that is not where we're going to find fulfillment. And even though we know that in here, the question is, as they say, head and heart knowledge, they talk about salvation. But, we know it. We know that fact. But then have we really applied that in our lives in the way we dedicate ourselves to the things that we do? Ecclesiastes 12 is the last verse I want to go to. Here's the conclusion of Solomon's life experience and the thing that he did. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. All is vanity. And moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yea, he gave good heed and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written was upright, even words of truth. The words of the wise are as goads and as nails fastened by the masters of assemblies, which are given from one shepherd. And further, by these, my son, be admonished, of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. I like how God says in verse 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. He doesn't say, this is the conclusion of the whole matter. And what that makes me think, I don't know if this is what God intended, is that we know that that's the conclusion, but when he says, let us hear the conclusion of the matter, it's almost like God saying, but will you receive this? Because if he just says, this is the conclusion of the whole matter, but when he says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. So 2 lessons from the wisdom of Solomon. First one is, wisdom is more valuable than riches in this world. Seek wisdom. If you're going to dedicate your life to seeking something, you should seek wisdom first and foremost, and likely the other things will follow. And second, a life without God as the purpose is vanity. A life without God as your purpose is vanity. You don't want to use your very limited life and short life to learn that by experience. Why not learn it from the experience of Solomon and then use your life in a wise way? One that is not just vanity, like he said, vanity and vexation of spirit. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you, we thank you and praise you for your love toward us. Lord, it's not easy to dedicate our life to you, to have you at our purpose. We're sinful beings, Lord, and we often get distracted by the things of the world and the cares of this world and the riches and pleasures of this life. So I pray, Lord, that we learn from Solomon's wisdom, that we seek wisdom first and foremost, and we live a life that has you as the primary purpose. Help us to hear this conclusion that Solomon came to, not only to just know it, that this is what the Bible teaches, but Lord, to really apply it in our own life and reflect on our own life, how we spend our time and our resources, and what we are really building towards and what we find fulfillment in. And I pray, Lord, that we will only find fulfillment in you. So we thank you. We love you, Lord. We love you and we praise you for your goodness towards us. We thank you for salvation, and we pray all these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen.